The big question is about austerity. There is absolutely no need for anything to do with austerity. It is really a political project which has been carried out in the UK for nearly the last 30-40 years, which has resulted in this position we find ourselves in. And the project has generally eroded the purchasing power in the hands of ordinary people. It has resulted in concentration of wealth, and that matters because when ordinary people have money, what do? We spend it on everyday things, which has a much, much greater multiplier effect than somebody buying a Porsche or a painting, which hardly creates does not create that many additional jobs. So that is a kind of a thing. But we are constantly told the country is in debt. We all know we all borrow money, for example, to buy a house. The question is, what exactly are we in debt for? And on that, the government statistics are not very helpful at all, because government makes no distinction between the borrowing for capital purposes and those for revenue purposes, which anyone running a business would know. If you borrow for investment or capital purposes, that is long-term investment. If you have for everyday things, well, that is not for long-term. But the government finances make absolutely no distinction between the two. So actually, we are being constantly misled. But I'll give you some examples and some data as I go through. So my argument is that for the last 30 years at least, there has been an organized humiliation of normal people. Some people like to talk about ordinary people, I like to talk about normal people. We are the normal people. We are not just ordinary, we matter. We are the ones who are sane. We are the ones who face everyday realities, not just somebody who's being paid in a Swiss bank account through a company registered in Panama. They are not actually ordinary, neither are they normal. So if we go back in 1976, the proportion of the GDP which went to the workers in the shape of wages and salaries was 65.1%. Today it is 53%. There is no other Western country where there has been that much decline in the share of the GDP going to the workers. That is a massive decline. Okay? And now that we have zero contract hours, closure of final salary pension schemes and many other things, by the end of this decade, my forecast is, for the first time in the British history ever since the records began, we are looking at the proportion going in wages and salaries to be less than 50%. And that itself is a misleading number to some extent, because that also includes fat cats. It is very difficult to take out their share because the way the government stats are prepared. So it gives you some idea why we haven't got the purchasing power to deliver a sustainable economic recovery. Ordinary people just don't have it. Most people, their savings will barely make them survive for another couple of months. Okay, simply it is not there. So we are now racked with low pay and insecurity. There are about 5.3 million people in the UK living on a figure below the living wage. Even the church is not paying the living wage. Okay, bless them, as somebody said. There are 700,000 people on zero contract hours. Now, generation or two ago, people fought against this system, typified in the film on the waterfront, Marlon Brando's film on the waterfront, where the gangmaster and the docs decided who would get fed, whose children would get clothed, and who would work for the day. That is now back under another name. It's called zero contract hours. Universities have it. NHS have it. 700,000 people with absolutely no guarantee of any income, no job security, no sick pay, no holiday pay, no pension. It is all done in the name of producing flexible labour laws. Okay? There's nothing flexible about it if you're hungry and if you're thirsty and you're homeless and you're cold. So that is what has happened. 250,000 workers are even denied the minimum wage which the law says they must be paid. And at the same time we have the record highest corporate profits despite the recent recession. So it is somebody's blood, somebody's sweat, which is resulting in some executive bonus. Some 13 million people live below the poverty line. So companies are not paying them enough, so the biggest increase in poverty is amongst the working people. Companies are not paying them enough. Companies are also dodging taxes, and then we top up the income through tax credits. It is insane. Make companies pay the wage. Why should we be subsidizing companies when they're making record profits? So it is all kind of wrong. We have legalized age discrimination in the UK. Anyone under the age of 20 is not even entitled to a full minimum wage. Do these people eat only half food? Are their clothes half price? Do they pay half fare on bus or a train? Do they pay half rent? No. We have legalized age discrimination. Legalized by the government. And of course supported by the CBI. So Ian Duncan Smith famously told us, anyone can live on £7 a day, and then we have Malcolm Rifkin telling us he can't live on £60,000 a year. So maybe we should have we should organise a petition where we say, well, every member of cabinet should live on £7 a day for a month and see how they get on. Maybe they'll have a better sympathy. Hopefully somebody will start this petition, and we can all join in and maybe make that a general election issue. So this is part of the organised humiliation of ordinary people. This is how population is controlled. A lot of people feel utterly helpless. What can they do about it? And there are problems to do with that. So the 1% richest households in the UK have more wealth than the combined total of that owned by 55% of the population. It is the inevitable outcome when ordinary people, normal people, have been suppressed. Top 10% have more wealth than 44% of all the households. The poorest 50% of the households barely account for 9% of total wealth. We don't have the reservoirs where we can dip in to keep the economy going. Okay? We built a shelf-stacking economy. We destroyed the skill economy in this country because of the government policies. So every 2 jobs in manufacturing have a potential to create 1 more in maintenance and support. But a shelf-stacking economy does not lead to anything. I'm an accountant, but we now become a nation of accountants. We have 330,000 professionally qualified accountants in the UK, which is more than the rest of the European Union put together. We still can't produce a decent set of accounts. Ask Tesco. Okay? Ask Tesco whether they can do it. Okay? And we can't tell an asset from a liability. We don't have real engineering, but financial engineering is absolutely rife. We have young graduates joining big accountancy firms, and their first training session is how to devise a tax dodging scheme which nobody can investigate. I've been advising Margaret Hodge and the Public Accounts Committee, looking at lots of stuff coming from whistleblowers in the background. It's absolutely shocking. These organisations are criminal organisations. They are robbing the public purse. Except the thieves are not living in kind of some dark, dingy places. They are residing in smart city centre offices. They're wearing the smartest suits, live in leafy suburbs, drive the best cars, go to most expensive restaurants. I call them the pinstripe mafia. That's a phrase being popularized in the media because they're no different from the mafia. They're robbing ordinary people, disabling families, disabling streets, communities, societies. That is what's been going on with us. So for the last few years, most people have suffered a real terms cut in their take-home pay. But what did we find last year? The 1,000 richest people increased their wealth by 15.4%, and they are now worth 519 billion. If we took away 10% of their wealth, there is no austerity in there. That's what we need to do. Just take away 10%. These people tell us they're very patriotic, they like to help. Okay, so now please help. Give up 10%. Can you spend 519 billion in your lifetime? You can't spend it. There is no empirical evidence to show that anyone takes their wealth with them, so why not use it? Okay? So, as an academic, I have to look for empirical evidence. I never found any. So, presumably that is the truth. Okay? So, we have the second lowest state pension in the Western world. The only country below us is Mexico, where the state pension is on average 28.5% of the average earnings. In the UK it's about 32%. In Italy, despite all their problems, it is 70%. In France, 50%. Australia, 50%. Now, many people, government said in the past, could supplement their state pension with their occupational pensions. Well, final salary pension schemes have all disappeared. And how is somebody on the minimum wage supposed to put money away for their pension? So we had a very famous director of a FTSE 100 company who advised the government to raise the retirement age to 70, but he himself retired at 54. He said he was too tired. I meant to ask him, have you tried doing manual work at 70 to see how you get on? So these people are not normal people who suggest these things. We are the normal people who face up to this. So, at the very least, the state pension should equal the minimum wage. It should not be less than that. Nobody on the minimum wage should pay any income tax of any kind. No national insurance contribution. But governments are not willing to do that. Okay. So governments give very generous tax relief on pension contributions. So some 34.8 billion is the figure for the tax relief on pension contributions. In addition to that, many people in good pension schemes opt out of the national insurance. That adds up to about another 17 billion. So it's over 50 billion is the cost to the taxpayer. Just to put that into perspective, the NHS budget is about 95 billion a year, and the defence budget is about 33 billion. So we are spending far more on the tax relief for pension contributions than we are spending on defence, and the NHS figure is a bit higher than that. But the 70% of this tax relief is taken by just the top rate taxpayers. Okay? Higher for the top rate taxpayer. Most ordinary people, so 2/3 of this 70% disappears basically for the rich. So if the government was to say we would restrict the tax relief on pension contributions to the basic rate only, that is 20%, you could easily raise about £15 billion a year. More than enough to increase state pension straight away by 10%. Okay. All social security benefits nearly by 10%. So we are spending £164 billion a year on various benefits, which includes the state pension and all other kind of benefits as well. But the governments are not really doing that. So ordinary people have been humiliated, as I said. Low pension is part of that. And again, we see ordinary people aspired for some social mobility. It was the Labour government Tony Blair, which introduced university fees. £1,000 initially, now going up to 9,000, though some other universities charge a lot. Though Ed Miliband has said, oh well, I'll row back a bit, and it will become 6,000, but that still does not resolve the problem. And even the difficulty is many ordinary people, normal people, can't even afford to, support their children when they go to education, because a lot of other well-off families can buy them laptops, additional tuition, all kinds of things. So again, that needs to be addressed if you want to increase the chances of social mobility, but we don't really have any government proposing those kind of policies. Successive governments have followed regressive taxation. So let's just look at these figures. In 1979, when Margaret Thatcher came to power, the poorest 10% of the population paid 35% of their income in direct and indirect taxes. VAT, income tax, council tax, everything included. So 10%, the poorest 10% paid 35%, and the richest 10% paid 37%. Okay, that was the figure. 1997, after John Major is booted out, the poorest 10% paid 44% of their income in direct and indirect taxes, the richest 10%, 34%. Huge gap. The poorest paying 44%, the richest 34%. Well, then we had the Labour government, so by the time Labour government goes out in 2010, things haven't changed much. So the poorest 10% paid 43%. And the richest 10% paid 33%. And the most latest statistics, poorest 10% now pay 47%. And the richest 10%, 35%. Successive governments have followed regressive policies. Okay? That's why I was saying, well, if you're earning a minimum wage, why should you be paying any tax? It's minimum to start with. But the governments haven't done anything. Why? One of the reasons is successive governments have destroyed or weakened alternative institutional structures which could represent the voiceless, represent the poor. Trade unions have been weakened and destroyed. So in 1980, about 80% of the workers were covered by collective bargaining agreements. You can't, as an individual, negotiate with an employer. You just be chewed up. Today, it's about 25% of workers are covered by collective bargaining. Okay? Trade union membership in 1980 was about 13 million. It's about 6 million now. So governments have weakened trade union rights, employment rights. And there was a court case last week which basically said if you employ less than 20 people, you haven't even got to give employees any notice of any consultation on redundancy. Okay? Otherwise, it's 90 days, but the current government has proposed reducing it to 45 days. So we are the kind of modern Bedouins, not putting our stuff on a camel and looking for a watering hole. We're just supposed to put our stuff on a removals lorry and chase a corporation, leave behind a community and anything else. So again, anti-trade union laws have not helped. There's no restriction on corporations which prevents them, as it were, from moving out productive facilities. So we can raise mountains, clear forests, divert rivers, put up tarmac roads, but companies don't owe loyalty to anybody. No community, no product, no worker, nothing. They can just move, they chase money. So look on the HSB website, I looked last night, and they're telling you how socially responsible they are. Yeah. You can't bank on it, can you? Look. So there we are. So what is this government banked on? This government has banked on revival of economy in the hope that normal people whose income is already suppressed will borrow more and more to survive. So the personal debt of individuals in this country is about 1.4 trillion pounds. George Osborne thinks by next year it should be 2.15 trillion. How is such an economy sustainable, where you continue to borrow more and more simply to live? Problem. Okay? So one of the reasons for austerity is it's a political project. Okay? To weaken trade unions, weaken workers, deplete their purchasing power, so that wealth can travel upwards. And I'm giving you some statistics, and here are some more. So the neoliberals always told us that they will roll back the state, which is a big lie. They have not rolled back the state, they restructured it. They restructured it in such a way that now state has ended up giving monopolies to private companies, gas, water, electricity, trains. There are monopolies. Previously we could go to a politician and say, well, I'm unhappy about this, he might do something. Now they shrug their shoulders and say nothing to do with them. Oh, it's a private company, you go and do something. Okay, they don't want to know anything about this. The state now guarantees corporate profits. It can't guarantee a pension, can't guarantee a health service, can't guarantee education, but it guarantees corporate profits. So every year about £88 billion of taxpayers' money is paid to cover outsourcing by government. Okay? So in our local hospital, the physiotherapy unit is now going to be run by a private company, and what's the first thing they're doing? Reducing, instead of half-hour appointments, you've got 20 minutes appointments. They're going to have less staff, because we know 25% of whatever money you give the company is profit. That will disappear. So 88 billion is the rough and ready figure. About £85 billion a year is being given to companies in the shape of grants, subsidies, insurance schemes, preferential credit and related government support. And when questions are asked about in Parliament, I've persuaded some MPs to ask questions, governments are not forthcoming. They will say, so-and-so is covered by confidentiality agreements. So vast amount, okay, is given. So I'll give you some examples in a moment. So we bailed out the banks. Government simply printed money, 375 billion. Imagine if that much money was simply given to say, go and build industries for tomorrow, refurbish the roads. Okay? But they are not simply doing that. Okay? And there is still a vast amount outstanding in relation to the loans and guarantees for ailing banks. And government this month has done a trick, engaged in creative accounting, has taken out the figures for the Lloyds Bank from its total borrowing number to show that there is a massive improvement might put. So we support, through the European Union farming policy, multinational corporations. So the European Union has provided nearly £70 billion a year, and it's rising every year, in support of agricultural producers. And that just does not mean farms. So for example, Tate & Lyle so far has received 830 million euros in subsidies. It does not own a single farm anywhere. Okay? Does that mean the sugars come down in price? Well, nobody sweetened my shopping bill for that. Okay? Nestle has collected 93 million euros from the European Union. Other beneficiaries include Haribo, people who make sweets, okay, Coca-Cola, Duke of Westminster, the royal family, and the Catholic Church. Amen to that. Okay. So we are paying for that. Okay. Now, as I'm reeling out these figures, you can say, well, if we stop this, stop that, curtail that, there's plenty of money which could be raised, so that anyone talking about making cuts is absolutely in a bonkers, really. There's plenty of resources. So we give government contracts to companies like G4S who at the end could not provide security for the London Olympics. Okay? But governments have been busy promoting this religion, that private is best, public is bad, corporations are wonderful kind of thing. So again, sorry, I'll speed up a bit, okay. So Serco, been in the news again today. Serco receives government contracts and at the end could not deliver. We have private academies which are now failing, okay. Railway companies have been receiving on average 4 to 5 billion a year subsidy ever since privatization, which is roughly the amount they pay in dividends. And the profit-making state line has been privatized again on the East Coast, okay, because of this religion that it must be privatized. BP, Chevron, ConocoPhillips, ExxonMobil and Shell in the last decade made over $1 trillion in profit, but they picked up a UK government subsidy of $6.8 billion because companies don't want to take the risks of drilling in North Sea and gas. They'd rather somebody else bore the risks. They're saying it's too risky, support us. Now, if we must give companies subsidies, we'll treat it as a loan, or say, well, we'll buy some of your shares so that the public has an equity in those companies. We just give it away. Okay, no questions are asked. Will a company give away $6.8 billion? No way. Okay, they simply will not do that. BT refuses to put broadband in rural areas, so we've given it subsidies running into billions. So BT will now own the infrastructure and will collect the rents from that broadband facility forevermore. The taxpayer will not ask for the money back. So again, an example. So EDF and its partners who sell electricity are going to receive nearly £18 billion in subsidy to build some nuclear power stations. You said, just a minute, your business is generating electricity, why don't you go and invest? No, it's too risky, they want the public handouts. PFI, 55 billion is the value of the contracts, but the taxpayer will pay back over 300 billion. So 250 billion profit is guaranteed. With low interest rates, isn't it time the government renegotiated these contracts and said, just a minute, you're not having this, you're not going to make this profit anymore. But even worse, many of these PFI company contracts are moved offshore so that they don't even pay tax on the profit they are making. So again, problems. And this one really takes the mickey. Walt Disney picking up 16.6 million in subsidy because they made part of Captain America here, and they're bringing another project for next year, for this year, for which they're going to get another 20 million subsidy. Okay? We subsidize people going to the opera. Nobody subsidizes anybody to go and watch Celtic or Rangers. But some people want to go and watch opera, well, let them go and pay their own price. No, they can't afford it. So we have a problem, okay? So Lotus, the sports car manufacturer, has so far picked up 10 billion subsidy. 10 billion. How many of you can afford a Lotus? Okay, maybe the flower, but not the car. And if you don't like Lotus, what about a Porsche? The Porsche price at 90,000 now has a government subsidy of 5,000 because they're supposedly testing some new technology. But if we, as I said, if we're going to give money, we say, okay, we either treat it as a loan or we give us some of your shares. It's not just going to be a handout, but that's what we do. £34 billion a year is the figure of the tax gap. Tax gap is made up of tax avoidance, tax evasion, tax not collected, that is in arrears. My friend Richard Murphy estimates it to be about 120 billion. I think his numbers are right. Anybody done anything to address that? Nothing. HSBC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, every company's at it. There isn't a single major multinational corporation which is not dodging taxes. Okay? I've been working on a project which we have put forward to some officials at the Treasury, under which it would not be possible at all. It's redesigning the world's corporate tax system. We don't do little projects, we only do big ones. And under that, it will not be possible for any company to dodge tax by saying we are routing transactions through Ireland or Cayman. But guess what? The Treasury doesn't like it. Why? Because big companies don't like it. The political system is about appeasing big corporations. Political system is kind of out of control. Boots gets 40% of its turnover from NHS prescription. It processes them, and that's how it generates its revenues. But it was bought out by a private equity who moved the headquarters to Zug in Switzerland. The £9 billion debt is loaded in the UK, even though all of it is not used in the UK. So the interest payment on that reduces Boots' taxable profits, okay, and has enabled Boots to reduce its taxes by over £1 billion, okay. So other countries have what they call thin capitalization rules. They're saying, okay, what are your operations? We don't believe that this 9 billion is relevant because you're not all using it here. You're only using about £1 billion of your borrowing, or 2 billion. We'll give you interest relief on that, but not on 9, but we do. So George Osborne has dreamt up a great big tax avoidance scheme. Anyone of you heard this thing called patent box? No? Patent box is very simple. The idea is you encourage companies to innovate, and if they innovate, you give them a tax break. Now the question is, what do you mean by innovate? Oh, you've got to have a patent. So imagine I'm wearing this shirt and you think this button on it is incredibly sexy, and you've got to have this button and you're willing to pay £100 for the shirt. So I'll register a patent on this button. Under the government rules, I can now assign 90% of the profit from this shirt to this button. Okay? And the profit is now only taxable at 10%. Not the 20% rate which is applicable. Okay? Now the problem is, what are the companies doing? They're just creating patents out of thin air, and now there is a market in leasing patents. The patent can be owned in a tax haven. You actually don't have to create it. So we are heading in a race to the bottom. This government has been creating more tax dodges. Not a single thing it has introduced has really effectively addressed tax avoidance. Okay?
Can I stop you there?
Yeah. Okay.
Wind up, please.
Okay, I'll just wind up.
I'm glad Stephen wasn't here.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah. So all of this is, so we are threatened with these kind of austerity cuts because of the political system we have. The political system we have, political parties are for sale to the highest bidder. MPs give us a brown envelope and we'll promote your kind of policies. Corporations give jobs to potential and former ministers, and they are able to buy into the political system. We have one part of Parliament, House of Lords, which is based on bribery, corruption, donations, couple of £100,000, and you can be a legislator for life. Nobody can get rid of you. And inevitably those are the kind of interests which are promoted. So we need to be smarter, and we need to develop alternative policy. We need to inform people that there is nothing natural, nothing inevitable about this thing called austerity. It is being hoisted upon us, and it is inevitable part of the system which is suppressing all of us. And ultimately the irony is even the capitalists can't make money, because if we haven't got the money to spend, they can't make profit. If the state can't subsidize them because they are busy undermining tax revenues, they themselves can't flourish. So they're actually writing their own death warrant, but they can't see it. Maybe we will help them to see it.